October 2, 1945. A press release arrives at Allied headquarters in Frankfurt, Germany. The rain outside hammers the windows. Inside, Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower signs an order that ends the combat career of the most feared general in the European theater. George Patton, the man who broke the spine of the Wehrmacht, is being relieved of command, not for losing a battle, not for tactical failure, but for 27 words spoken at a press conference 1 week earlier. Words about politics, words about the enemy, words that turned Patton from a national hero into a political liability overnight. This is the story of how the greatest battlefield commander of World War II became a prisoner of the peace he helped create, and why the system that needed him in war destroyed him the moment the guns went silent. August 1945. Germany is in ruins. George Patton stands in Bavaria as military governor and commander of the Third Army, the force that tore through France, smashed the Bulge, and drove deep into the German heartland. He is 60 years old. He has spent 3 years fighting the most mechanized, most brutal war in human history, and he won. But winning a war and winning the peace are not the same thing. Patton understands tank columns, supply lines, and enemy weak points. He does not understand occupation policy, denazification programs, or the delicate politics of a shattered continent. Eisenhower knows this. He has known Patton for decades, and he spent the entire war managing Patton's genius and containing his disasters. The slapping incidents in Sicily, the inflammatory speeches, the constant need to keep Patton aimed at the enemy and away from reporters. Now the war is over, and Patton is supposed to govern Bavaria, enforce denazification policy, remove former Nazis from positions of power, and help rebuild a democratic Germany. But Patton does not see it that way. He sees incompetence. He sees bureaucrats in Washington trying to dictate how to run an occupied territory. He sees a policy that demands the removal of anyone who ever joined the Nazi Party, which means removing everyone with administrative experience. And he sees the Soviets consolidating power in Eastern Europe while the Americans dismantle the only military force capable of stopping them. So Patton starts talking, and that is when the trap closes. April 1945. The war in Europe is in its final weeks. Patton's Third Army is racing east across Germany, and Patton is watching the Soviets do the same thing from the other direction. The Soviets are taking Berlin. They are taking Prague. They are taking every inch of ground they can reach before the shooting stops. Patton understands this, and he wants to keep going. In his diary and in private conversations, Patton starts floating an idea that is political poison. He suggests that the Allies should push the Soviets back. He even suggests rearming the Wehrmacht and using German divisions as part of a combined force to drive the Soviets out of Eastern Europe. This is insane by the standards of Washington and London. The United States and the Soviet Union are allies. The idea of immediately turning on them, of rearming the Germans who just killed millions of people, is politically unthinkable. But Patton is not thinking politically. He is thinking strategically. He sees the Soviet Union as the next threat. Eisenhower does not agree. Eisenhower understands that wars are won as much in conference rooms as on battlefields. He understands that alienating the Soviets in 1945 could fracture the alliance and create a new war. So Eisenhower tells Patton to stop, stay in your lane, govern Bavaria, enforce the denazification policy. Do your job. Patton agrees, but he does not mean it. September 22, 1945. Patton holds a press conference in Bavaria. It is supposed to be routine. A reporter asks about denazification, specifically why so many former Nazi Party members are still in administrative positions in Bavaria under Patton's command. Patton answers honestly. He says that the Nazi Party in Germany was like the Democratic or Republican parties in the United States. He says that people joined because it was necessary for their careers, not because they were ideological fanatics. He says that removing everyone who ever paid Nazi Party dues means removing everyone with the skills needed to run utilities, transportation, local government, and civil administration. He says the policy is stupid, unworkable, and counterproductive. The reporters write it down, every word. The comparison between the Nazi Party and American political parties is explosive. The suggestion that denazification is stupid policy is a direct contradiction of orders from Washington. The story hits the wires within hours. By the next morning, it is front-page news across the United States. By the afternoon, congressmen are demanding answers. Eisenhower summons Patton to Frankfurt. The meeting is not pleasant. Eisenhower demands to know what Patton was thinking. Patton defends his position. He argues that denazification as written is unenforceable. Eisenhower tells him that saying it out loud to the press is insubordination and political suicide. Eisenhower gives Patton one chance. Go back to Bavaria. Fire the Bavarian minister-president. Replace him with someone acceptable to Washington. Make a public show of enforcing the policy, and stop talking to reporters. Patton agrees. He drives back to Bad Tals. He fires Fritz Schiefer. He issues orders accelerating denazification, and he thinks the crisis is over. It is not. Eisenhower does not trust that the problem is solved. He orders an investigation into Patton's administration of Bavaria. What the investigators find is worse than the press conference. Patton has been systematically ignoring denazification orders for months. Former Nazi Party members hold key positions throughout the Bavarian government. Some of them are not low-level administrators. Some of them are former SS officers, former Gestapo agents, people with direct involvement in war crimes. And Patton has protected them. The investigation also uncovers Patton's views on displaced persons, particularly Jewish survivors of concentration camps. Patton has been writing in his diary about his distaste for the camp survivors, describing them in language that is openly anti-Semitic. He complains that they do not recover quickly enough, that they prefer to live in poor conditions. This is not just politically toxic, it is morally indefensible. These are people who survived the Holocaust. Eisenhower reads the reports. He has defended Patton before. After the slapping incidents in Sicily, Eisenhower fought to keep Patton in command because he needed him for the invasion of France. But now the war is over. Patton is no longer indispensable, and the political cost of keeping him in command is higher than the value of his tactical brilliance. On October 2, 1945, Eisenhower signs the order. Patton is relieved as commander of Third Army. He is relieved as military governor of Bavaria. He is reassigned to a meaningless staff position in Bad Homburg, where he will oversee a small team compiling the tactical history of the European War. It is a desk job, a dead end. Patton is devastated, but there is nothing he can do. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. Because what happens next shows how quickly a reputation built over decades can collapse when politics and personality collide. What happened to Patton was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of a fundamental mismatch between the man and the moment. Patton was a product of the old American military aristocracy. He came from wealth. He believed in hierarchy, discipline, and the moral clarity of combat. He believed that politics was something other people did, while generals fought wars. But World War II was a political war from the beginning. It was fought by a coalition of powers with competing interests. It was fought under the scrutiny of a free press in democracies where public opinion mattered. And it ended not with a clean victory, but with a messy occupation that had to be rebuilt and integrated into a new international order. Patton understood tanks. He understood maneuver warfare. He understood how to break an enemy army and exploit the breach. But he did not understand that command in 1945 required more than tactical brilliance. It required political sensitivity, coalition management, and the ability to subordinate personal opinions to policy requirements. Eisenhower understood this. That is why Eisenhower became Supreme Commander and later President of the United States. Eisenhower could navigate between competing interests, balance military necessity against political reality, and keep the coalition together. Eisenhower was a political general, and in a political war, that made him indispensable. Patton could not do that, or would not. He saw the political constraints as obstacles to military effectiveness. He saw the need to manage public opinion as weakness, and he said so, repeatedly, loudly, to anyone who would listen. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts about George Patton, Dwight Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and Winston Churchill, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. Because the story of Patton's downfall is not just about one general. It is about the collision between two kinds of leadership, and what happens when the skills that win wars become liabilities in peace. Let us put the scale of Patton's command into perspective. When he was relieved in October 1945, the Third Army still controlled over 400,000 troops spread across Bavaria and parts of Austria. Bavaria itself had a population of approximately 9 million people. Patton was responsible for governing a territory the size of a mid-sized European nation. Under denazification policy, as written, Patton was supposed to remove approximately 800,000 former Nazi Party members from positions of authority. That included teachers, police officers, civil servants, utility workers, and local government officials. In practical terms, it meant removing the entire administrative class of an occupied territory and replacing them with people who had been excluded from power for the previous 12 years. Patton argued that this was impossible, and the numbers suggest he had a point. By 1946, denazification policy was being quietly modified because occupation authorities realized that strict enforcement was creating more problems than it solved. But Patton did not just argue the point. He ignored the orders, protected people who should have been removed, and then defended his actions by comparing the Nazi Party to normal political parties in a democracy. That comparison was not just politically tone-deaf, it was morally obscene. Eisenhower did not want to fire Patton. They had known each other for decades. They had served together in the interwar years. They had argued, clashed, and reconciled more times than anyone could count. And Eisenhower genuinely admired Patton's battlefield skills. But Eisenhower was not just Patton's friend. He was Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. He answered to the War Department, to President Truman, and ultimately to the American public. And in October 1945, all of those audiences were demanding that something be done about the general in Bavaria who was defending Nazis and insulting Holocaust survivors. The war was over. The need for aggressive, risk-taking battlefield commanders was gone. The need now was for administrators, diplomats, people who could manage the complex politics of occupation without creating international incidents every time they spoke to a reporter. Patton was not that person. He would never be that person. And there was another factor. Eisenhower was already being discussed as a potential presidential candidate. His political future depended on his reputation as a steady, responsible leader. Being seen as the man who protected Patton, despite clear evidence of insubordination and bigotry, would destroy that reputation. So Eisenhower made the decision that preserved the alliance, satisfied the political demands from Washington, and protected his own future. He relieved Patton of command. Patton's last weeks in command are painful to read about. He knows he is being pushed out. He writes in his diary with a mix of defiance and self-pity, complaining about politicians, about Eisenhower's lack of loyalty, about the injustice of being punished for telling the truth as he sees it. Then he moves to Bad Homburg and begins the meaningless work of compiling operational histories. It is bureaucratic, detail-oriented, the kind of staff work that Patton has always hated. He is 60 years old. He is in declining health, and he is deeply unhappy. On December 9, 1945, less than 10 weeks after being relieved of command, Patton is injured in a car accident near Mannheim. His staff car collides with a military truck. Patton suffers a broken neck. He is paralyzed from the neck down. He dies 12 days later on December 21st without ever leaving the hospital. The timing feels almost symbolic. The man who could not adapt to peace dies in peacetime in an accident far from any battlefield. There is no heroic last stand, no final victory, just a car crash and a hospital bed. The title of this story is Why Patton Couldn't Say What He Really Thought. Political Trap. So what was the trap? The trap was this. Patton believed that his role as a general gave him the right to express his strategic opinions without regard for political consequences. He believed that civilian control of the military meant civilians set the objectives, but generals had freedom to speak their minds. But that is not how the system works. Civilian control of the military means that military officers execute policy decided by elected leaders. It means that when a general disagrees with policy, he can argue his case through proper channels, but once the decision is made, he implements it or he resigns. Patton thought the trap was that politicians were preventing him from telling the truth about the Soviets, about denazification, about the realities of occupation. But the actual trap was his belief that truth-telling without discipline, without political awareness, without subordination to civilian authority, was a virtue rather than insubordination. Every time Patton spoke his mind without considering the political consequences, he made it harder for Eisenhower to defend him and easier for his critics to argue that he was a liability. The trap was not that he could not say what he thought. The trap was that he did say what he thought, repeatedly, loudly, in ways that made it impossible for the system to keep him in a position of authority. In the decades after his death, Patton became a myth. The film starring George C. Scott turned him into an icon of American military aggression. The myth emphasizes his battlefield brilliance and his defiance of authority, while downplaying his bigotry, his administrative failures, and the legitimate reasons he was relieved of command. The real Patton was more complicated. He was genuinely brilliant at armored warfare. He inspired intense loyalty among his soldiers and drove his units to achieve things that other commanders thought impossible. Those qualities are real and they matter. But he was also a product of his time and class in ways that became unacceptable as the world changed. His views on race, his casual anti-Semitism, his contempt for people he considered inferior, were not quirks. They were core beliefs that shaped how he treated people under his command and how he administered occupied territory. George Patton was one of the greatest battlefield commanders in American history. That is true. He was also a man whose career ended in failure and bitterness because he could not adapt to a world that no longer needed what he had to offer. Both things are true, and understanding both is necessary to understand the man, the war, and the peace that followed.